Well, I'm Taneya Koonce.
And I'm Destiny Hanks.
And we're here to talk and have a discussion about some of the things that you need to do when researching your family history and wanting to learn more about your past. And hopefully how that can inform the work that y'all are doing with the Fort Negley Descendants Project. I thought we could just start with going over a few principles about how do you get started researching your family tree? That's a question that we get a lot. I am a member of the Nashville chapter of the Afro-American Historical and Genealogical Society, and that's exactly what we do. We help people get started with their family trees. So I do a presentation that's about an hour, but we're going to go far less than that. I just want to cover a few basic principles that will just help as you get started with your research. And one of the first principles that we tell people when they're interested in getting started is the first thing you do is talk to your family members. Have you had a chance as you've gotten started in your history to talk to your family? This morning? All right, tell me more.
So I went to my granddaddy's house and we talked a little bit about some of the things that he knows. But I realized since a lot of the stuff that happened in his family, he's very young, so he doesn't remember a lot. Okay. So we don't have much information besides his mom and dad. Okay,
but you do know his mom and his dad, so you've got that information. Well, that's definitely good, because in talking to family members, you'll see that they know things that you don't know because you're new to this, or maybe you don't remember because this is the life they've lived and you're coming up into it. So that's definitely one of the first things we tell people is talk to your family members. Ideally, you want to try to record what they tell you. And that's actually how I got started doing my family history. I was in college, like you. And one summer I went home and talked to both my grandmothers and said, tell me about your families. So they told me, and I just started writing notes. And I still have those notes 25 years later. I still have those notes and I refer to them. So that's really the first step, is talking so they can share with you about their families. The next step that we generally recommend is to start collecting family documents. So many of our family members have things lying around their house that can be helpful as you want to know more. And that can include funeral programs. I have an aunt, bless her heart. She's collected funeral programs for the past 50 years. So she has quite the collection. You can collect pictures. And I think you were mentioning earlier that you had some pictures. Before you started gathering pictures, did you have access to many, or are you having to actually go seek them?
I had to go seek them from he has a collection in his bedroom, I believe. Okay. Yeah, so we looked through those along with the funeral programs and the obituaries.
Okay. So he has funeral programs and obituaries and pictures. Yeah, that's definitely exactly what you want to do. You just want to start seeing what your family members have and collecting them and looking in them for information that can help you. Now, I did mention that you want to write down what you learn. And through that process of talking to family members, gathering documents, you're going to start to learn all this information about your family. So it's important to record it. And there is a form that's often used when people are getting started to just keep track of what they learn. It's called a Pedigree Chart. So we have a page on the OGS Nashville website of research resources, and we have a Pedigree Chart linked from that page. So I'll be sure to give you that URL so that you can get to your own form. But what the Pedigree Chart does is allows you to record your family tree in a very basic format. So you start with yourself and you're writing down your name, your birth date. Then you put your parents, their names, their birth dates. Your grandparents, same thing, marriage dates and locations. Because dates and locations are going to be very important to help you find records to go along to help you verify what you're learning. So, this Pedigree Chart, the basic form takes you back 4 generations. And this is really just where you get started. Just write down what you're finding out. And this helps you record the facts, and then you can keep like a notebook to just record the stories. I often tell people you can get very fancy. You can do it with software, your computer. You can do it online on sites like Ancestry.com. But if you're just getting started, you don't want to get too overwhelmed. So just write it down on paper. Just get it down. Another principle that's helpful to think about is knowing your geography. Because in the United States, many of our records are kept at the county level or parish level. And so you need to know your counties. Nashville's in Davidson County. Your family's from Nashville, is that correct?
Yes.
Any other parts of Tennessee?
I believe my granddaddy told me Gallatin, but he also knows that family's in Kentucky too.
Okay, so Gallatin is Sumner County, and so that's important to know. And then in Kentucky, you can figure out what the county. Right, you may not know offhand what the counties are, but you can Wikipedia. So you want to know the counties. Another thing about knowing the counties is the history of how they formed, because that will help you keep in mind when you start looking back. It was like 1800s. maybe a county didn't get founded till 1890. Well, you can't look for that county in 1880 if it didn't exist. So knowing the history of the county. And so that's when Wikipedia comes in very handy. So that's what we tell people, get familiar with your geography. All right. And then kind of once you've done those steps, there are certain types of records that we love to tell people to go to first. We call them the low-hanging fruit because they're abundant, they're fairly easy to get to, and they are available for a lot of people. And so the first type of record in that category are the U.S. Census records. Have you looked at any census records yet?
For the Fort Negley Project, I have.
All right.
Yeah.
How was that experience for you?
Overwhelming.
It definitely can be. So to give you a little bit of background, you probably pick this up as you start looking at census records. The census is required by our Constitution. The government has to count the population every 10 years, and they've been doing this since 1790. Now, the reason they do it has nothing to do with family history, but the information that's collected helps us. And every 10 years, every census, the questions change slightly. And so because of that, as you go census year by census year, you're going to get different tidbits of information. When you work with the census, the idea is to start with the most recent census and work backwards in time. So the most recent census we have is 1940. The government does put a 72-year restriction before they're released for privacy reasons. Yeah. So the most recent one we have is 1940. And then you can go 1930, 1920, 1910. You just want to work backwards in time. Now, there is a census year that we don't have access to. Do you know which one that is by any chance? No? That's 1890. Unfortunately, most of the 1890 census was lost. There was a fire that caused some of the records to be burned, and then there was subsequent water damage. So they got tossed. And now there are some counties that do have the 1890 census at the federal level, but many don't. So what you'll find is a lot of people refer to that time period between 1880 and 1900 as a gap. You might have an ancestor that was born in 1879 and you just wish, or 1889, and just wish you had 1890 to see if you could find them. So that does create a little bit of a problem sometimes. But the reason they're good to use is because they're all freely available. All the census records for the federal census levels are freely available on sites that we'll take a look at a little bit later. And you can search and look for information for people across the whole country. And so given that it's counting the whole country, that's millions of people. So that's definitely the place to start, is find your ancestor in the census and work backwards in time. Another type of low-hanging fruit are vital records, death certificates, marriage certificates, birth certificates. Now, you're here in Tennessee, and every state has different requirements as far as what they'll allow you to access and what they won't. Who's allowed to access it, who's not. Here in Tennessee, for example, death certificates before the late 1950s are public record. Anyone can order them and look at them and see them. They're actually at the Tennessee State Library and Archives, and there's a database online that has death records. I think it's 58. Don't hold me on the year, but around 1958 and earlier. There are some states that are even more open. Like my family's in North Carolina. Well, if you were born in North Carolina, you were married in North Carolina, you've passed away in North Carolina, no matter the year, that's public record. Anyone can access it. So it depends on the state. And you want to get familiar with that. And over time, you will. But the reason that vital records are so great is because of the detail they provide. Think about death certificate. When someone passes away, the death certificate usually captures their parents, when they were born, where they were born, their occupation, where their parents were born, who was the informant. That's often a big clue. Who was the one who informed the information that goes on that certificate? So they're just full of information. Birth certificate's the same way. Who the parents are, their parents' ages. Maybe it tells you if the mother had other kids before that child. Like I have a case with my own grandmother. I look at her birth certificate and it says her mom had 4 kids before her. 2 of them had passed away. So it tells you information like that. It gives you clues. And marriage certificates. If you have a bride and a groom getting married, it may tell you the parents' names. It may even tell you whether the parents are living or not. Now, one of the disadvantages of certificates is that as we know them, they didn't get started till the early 1900s, before the states really decided everyone needs to complete these. So if you're looking for someone who was born in, say, in 1890, you may not find a birth certificate as you know it. But vital certificates are very important. And to get them, you want to first reach out to the state health department in the state that you're researching in, or go to the county and ask them, how do I get to the marriage and birth death certificates? They can definitely give you some insight. Again, that's why you need to know your geography, so you know which county to go to. So those are very important record types to have access to. Another version of vital records are burial records. There's a great site that a lot of us use called Find a Grave. Have you ever used Find a Grave? Yeah. So Find a Grave is a website where volunteers enter into a database locations where people are buried. So they'll go to a cemetery and just record the names of who's buried there. Or they'll look in newspaper obituaries and see someone's been buried in City Cemetery and go put it on Find a Grave. This person is buried in City Cemetery. And it has information such as their birth date, if it's known, their death date. Some people put pictures of grave sites. And so Find a Grave has millions of records. I actually don't know the count offhand, but it covers the whole country, in fact, the whole world, where just a whole bunch of volunteers go into information. So I've done that. I'll go to cemeteries, I'll record information, and I'll put it on Find a Grave. I'll go take pictures of graves, and I'll put it on Find a Grave. The benefit is that if you're researching family in a location where you're not physically at, you may benefit from someone else who's in that location and can go to the gravesite for you. Or you may find there's information on a headstone that you cannot get otherwise. You know, if someone passes away in 1930, they may have been born in 1870, and there's no birth certificate to tell you that, but it may have their birth date because at the time they passed away, it was known. So headstones can give you a lot of great information. So Find a Grave is a very good source, and we'll probably take a look at that a little later. Then thirdly, the third type of low-hanging fruit we like to talk about are military records. In particular, you know, this country had a draft for World War I, and the government required all men between a certain age to fill out a card to register themselves for the draft. Well, we have databases of those draft cards, 24 million men who filled out these cards. So if you have a male ancestor who was born within the right time frame, and on our resources page, we have information about the exact time range. I don't remember the date, but you have a very high chance of finding a draft card completed for them. Those draft cards give you information such as the man's closest relative, his occupation, who he was working for, his race, his height, his weight. So you get a little bit of a physical description, and the location where he registered for the draft. So those are very rich records. And with 24 million men included, that's a lot of people that you have a chance to find your ancestor. You can also write away for your military ancestors' records. The National Records Service Center and the National Archives have records for military and people who have been in the military. Now, the location where you write away to can vary depending on what branch they were in when they served in the military. But we have resources as well that help you know where to go to get that information. I'll give you an example. Whenever someone departs from the military, they get a form called a DD-214. Have you ever looked at a DD-14? No? Do you have anyone in your family who's been in the military?
Yeah, my granddad.
Your granddad. Okay, so we'll have to look at some military records, see if we can find his information. But you get what's called a DD-214. It's your separation paper. And it gives a summary of your activity while you're in the military. So that's generally, those are the few places we recommend. Census records, vital records, military records. Starting with just those can help get you a long way. Now, you may find as you're doing your research and you go backwards in time, given that you're descended from people who were formerly enslaved, there is this time period that we hit that's known as the brick wall. Because this is because we've talked earlier about using the census records. Start in 1940, go backwards in time. You get to 1870, well, a lot of people descended from formerly enslaved are not finding their ancestors in 1860 census because of slavery. Because of slavery and then emancipation, most African Americans were not included in the census by name until 1870. There are exceptions, but for the most part, 1870 is the first year you'll find many African Americans listed by name. Before then, you may find them in what are called slave census records, where it lists the slave holder. And next to the slave holder, it lists how many slaves they had, the ages, and the race, no names. So it can be more challenging to try and find your ancestor in census records. Fortunately, there are other types of records that we can look to find our ancestors, even when they weren't in the census, even when they weren't listed by name. Now, given that someone who was enslaved was considered property, the strategy you use then is to see if you can identify who owned them and search their records. So if you're looking for a person who you know was enslaved, figure out who the slaveholder was and search their tax records, their wills, their deeds. I mean, there's all kinds of records that were created because property has to be recorded. Property is taxed. Property is documented. So it becomes a very different ballpark. There's a great resource called the Freedmen's Bureau Records. I don't know if you've heard of those. You have heard of those? So the Freedmen's Bureau was an agency that was created after emancipation to help those who have been formerly enslaved into citizenship. And so they provided a myriad of services to help people, from helping start schools, running hospitals, giving rations, clothing, and supplies. They really went through all this effort to try to help those individuals. And there were records that were kept. It focuses largely on the southern states, as you can imagine, but there's 1,800 rolls of microfilm of these records. And through a partnership that the Afro-American Historical and Genealogical Society did with Familysearch and several other organizations like the National Museum for African American History and Culture, the names of the individuals in those records are being indexed and posted in a database online so we can search them. I'll give you I love sharing examples of my own family because I think it really helps personify what you can find. Well, one of my ancestors, my third great grandfather, I found a labor contract in those Freedmen Bureau records from 1866, where he'd entered into a contract with his former slaveholder to run the farm, and it talks about what his payment is for running that farm. He was going to be paid $150 a year plus some produce, and it laid out the expectations. So this was right after emancipation. This is how he was able to get started, trying to make a living for himself and his family. Unfortunately, we know that really could have been at times just a different form of slavery in and of itself because you're perpetually in debt. But to have that labor contract was a document that I found in the Freedmen Bureau records. So those are great sources, and we can look a little bit how you access those records. It's freely available online. I love to share things that are free because, not everyone has, the money to pay for a subscription site. So there are so many resources that are available to you for free. We all know and hear the commercials for Ancestry.com, and they have an incredible amount of records. But there is a cost to using it. You need to have a subscription. You can access it at the public library. So there are libraries who have subscriptions, so you can go to the library and use it. But that is definitely a great resource. There's also the Familysearch.org website. This is run by the Church of Latter-day Saints. And I don't know if you're familiar with the history of the Church of Latter-day Saints, but part of their religious tenet is documenting your ancestors. So for decades, they have been collecting records from across the world, not just records of Mormons, records of people across the world. They literally have a vault in the side of a mountain filled with microfilm after microfilm after microfilm. So they've been digitizing that to make it available online. They've been crowdsourcing the indexing of it so it becomes searchable. So it's definitely a great resource, a great website, and it's completely free. You just have to create a registration to be able to access it. And then you have sites like the U.S. GenWeb Project, which I do volunteer with. It's a completely volunteer-driven group of individuals that create websites for every county in the United States. So again, another reason to know your geography. So Davidson County, Tennessee, there's a website for it. And our volunteers try to provide resources to help people find information about their families. And the reason I volunteer with it is because when I was getting started, I gained a lot of information because someone else had volunteered their time. So those are just, some basic principles to think about. You want to talk to your family, gather pictures and documents, record what you're finding, and then look for documents to help support it.